When the faith of the people is torn, there's a nation that's born out of freedom, where the sons of courage are born. 'Tis the land of the star-spangled banner, 'tis a nation as fair as the day. Thank God for the right to be an American. Thank God for the USA. Thank God for the USA, land of the brave and true. Thank God for the true American wave, for the stars and the red, white, and blue. Thank God for the land we love, life and our liberty. Thank God for the right to be an American. Thank God for the USA.
Well, thank goodness for Presbycast, maybe. It's another one of those nights when Resby is traveling, but this is an emergency show. We haven't done one of those in a while. In fact, I tried to avoid the whole David French controversy. I did not comment on his last PCA hit piece a month ago, 2 months ago, whenever it was, post-GA, when he finally commented on his removal from a General Assembly seminar panel. I rarely have anything to say about David French. I didn't even have anything to say publicly about the controversy of his being invited and then disinvited because, like a presbyter, I shared my concern privately with someone who had power and influence, and I didn't think it was right to go public after speaking to someone privately. But here we are. David French has had more to say about the PCA in a transcribed interview. It's on the New York Times website. A little bit difficult to find a free copy of it to read, but several of us did. And we're going to go through the article by way of playing the audio, 16 minutes worth. We'll play it in segments, and that'll save you having to read it or find it to read. We're joined by some PCA folks, I guess FOLX is the way I should spell that, to be intersectional, woke, and all that stuff. So let's just go around the horn, quickly introduce everyone. We've got our friend Zoe, one half, or well, probably 40% really, of the Presby girls. Zoe, unmute and say hello to everyone and tell us why there hasn't been a Presby Girls show lately.
I will defer that question to the other 60% of Presby girls. And I just want to say I only accepted this invitation for the banter. I am pro banter and pretty much pro nothing else. So with that said, Presby girls is silent. We're like Sun Tzu. Anyway, read Art of War. That's how we're doing things around here. But great to be here once again as a somewhat unwelcome guest, but I kind of invited myself too. So anyway, great.
Not for the first
monologue
time.
again. No.
Yes, not for the first time. Well, we're glad you're here. And Ryan, unmute yourself. And you get a little crazy sometimes, but you've got a good command of facts, and that's why you've been invited. And I think you've got something to add here. If you'll kind of keep it under control, keep it on medium, as it were.
I strive to be medium, very mid. That's how the young people at church refer to me. He's mid.
If I was your size, I would strive to be medium. Yes, that's an aspirational goal.
I used to fit into a medium, but now I'm large.
Well, progress. And then Zach Groff, I have regrets for inviting him based on his pre-show behavior, but he does have a connection to this. He's been mentioned by the New York Times in relation to this whole affair. And he made a video, a song. I thought it was a little much and didn't really promote it back in the day, but I've shifted based on the level of rhetoric and everything else regarding this. So, Zach, how are you?
I am feeling very patriotic today. I have my American flag stamps here at my side to give me inspiration for this very important show that we're about to do. And yes, I am a New York Times recognized songwriter, singer-songwriter, and a member of my congregation gave me a T-shirt with that on. I'm not wearing the T-shirt today because I like to dress up for podcasts, so I'm wearing a button-down shirt, but it's red, white, and blue, again, because I love our country.
Well, very good. My hand's on my heart. It was on my heart as I introduced you. And
Also,
then
let the record show that the song was your idea.
No. Well, okay.
Yes,
that
it was.
That,
it
well,
was your suggestion.
Okay. Well, I didn't think you would really do it.
Well, I did.
So
because of you.
All right. That's the way my mind works. I just associate and rhyme things, and that's just what came out. But we may play it.
But I did it for Murica, and I did it for Job.
Okay. All right. Job, our PCA pastor friend, a converted Baptist from he's down in from Mississippi, down in Georgia. Job, is your performance level going to be acceptable tonight?
Hope so. I thought this was the Westminster Standard, so I think I may have been in the wrong place.
Well,
so I'll try to act like I'm on that podcast.
Yeah, I should say that Ryan Beasy hosts the Strange and Wonderful podcast, the Westminster Standard podcast, and he does stuff over there, and many of you listen, I'm sure.
I'll try to keep it mediocre, though.
Okay, good. All right, well, let's just set the stage very briefly. I think I alluded to it in the first few minutes. There was a controversy in the run-up to General Assembly. Apparently there was a very boring planned seminar on the Social Security, and the law was changed. This is a pastoral financial benefit thing. And they had to scramble to find another seminar. Somebody suggested, well, let's do something on politics and the difficulty of being a pastor in 2024 with all the political Sturm und Drang, as the Germans say. And, somehow or other, and I hope Ryan will help us because it's a confusing timeline, 3 other people, and nobody remembers their names hardly, and David French. Very quickly, for those who've lived under a rock, David French, he's a lawyer, former military lawyer, I believe, and I think he was probably a Baptist or a broad evangelical. I think, and you'll hear this, in about 2003, he moved to Philadelphia, joined the historic 10th Presbyterian Church. That got him hooked on the PCA. When he moved to Nashville, as he became more of a media figure, he joined a church in the Nashville area. I honestly don't know which one. I have known, but I've forgotten, and I'm not looking. I wasn't looking to mention them or look into that very much. He was a member there. To some point, had a falling out. And you'll hear about that. But since leaving the PCA, he's done what other people who have done in the past few years, which is to leave loud and not quite to let go, and seemingly to hold something of a grudge. He has some genuine complaints. His family's been through some stuff. But what I'd like to do tonight is bring a polity perspective here. I think what we have here is a failure, maybe not of church discipline, but a failure to use church discipline. Really, this exercise tonight is to help us learn a little more about Presbyterianism and to think about what could have been had things been handled differently. But anything any of you all would like to say before we jump into the audio? I guess not.
Does anybody know, is David French French?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, who knows?
I mean, his last name's French.
Well, probably.
He has a certain je ne sais quoi, if you know what I mean. But other than that, I don't think so.
If
really
you went,
core de spirit, you know.
If you went to history class, you know that in 1066, a lot of French people came into England, which is where most of us are from. So that's, a lot of people named French.
Well, he's got some elan or mojo or whatever they call it over there.
I don't have an opinion on that at all. And again, we have no malice towards him or his family.
Or the French.
Well, I don't. Okay.
Oh, I have malice towards the French big time.
That's a 50-50.
So
That's only because you
yourself.
were reared in Africa.
Yeah. So, and that's true.
And the Olympics were really weird this year. We should talk about that a little bit.
No,
let's
we're
talk
not.
let's talk about the Olympics a little
No,
bit.
I'm leaving if we talk about the Olympics.
Let's get Daryl in.
Well,
here
maybe
to
I
talk
shouldn't
about
have
the
said
Olympics.
that.
Yeah, I warned you, Zach, and I'm warning you again. So we're gonna again. I wouldn't care anything about what David French said, even being a former PCA member, if it didn't cast aspersions on the PCA and didn't. And I think we're going to hear some things tonight that almost represent reality and certainly the reality of our polity and the way things work. So let's just jump into it. We may not, it may take our normal time to go through this, and we may fly through it. But let's hear the beginning of this audio clip. If you were reading the article, you're just reading a transcript of it. I'll put it on the screen. We'll go ahead and do that for those who might want to follow along, just to see that we're not making it up. And now you'll see right there. This is one of the things. This is calculated for attention and, if not offense. He uses the F word, fundamentalist. And the headline is, which he probably wrote. Now, I used to be a journalist. Writers and reporters almost never write their own headlines. David French is a columnist, an opinion columnist who derives his primary income from the New York Times, that noted conservative evangelical publication, the New York Times. And the headline is, "My Old Church's Fundamentalist Wing Canceled Me." So that's a provocative headline. It's meant to be. I don't have any doubt about that. But before we hit play on clip one, I want to point one thing out. The word church means many different things. It can mean a building. It can mean a generic church. It can mean the universal church, the invisible or the visible church. It can mean a denomination, or it can mean a local congregation, or it can be a meeting of the church. He uses the word church fairly indiscriminately, and the man, Aaron Retica, who is interviewing him, doesn't know much about the church, and he uses it even less precisely. But "my old church's fundamentalist wing canceled me," that usage refers to the PCA, not to his local church, whatever it was, in Middle Tennessee. So as you hear the word church, think about, is this the local church? Is this the evangelical church, which David French has a particular problem with? Or is it the PCA, which he certainly has a problem with? So let's hear clip one. I'll try to scroll along, but that I may not be able to keep up. Here we go.
And I work with a number of our columnists and contributing writers, mostly on American politics. We're thinking constantly in opinion about the divisions in the country. And one of our columnists and someone I work closely with who's really explored this deeply is David French. He is in a unique position because he was once a fierce partisan, as he says himself, a Romney delegate in 2012, but from the legacy of...
Okay, I had to do a record scratch there. This man interviewing David French describes him as a fierce partisan because he was once a Mitt Romney delegate. Does anyone detect the irony there? I don't have an irony meter. Maybe the Machen horn could be the irony horn.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
Mitt
a little
Romney,
weird.
Yeah, Mitt Romney was like probably the least objectionable candidate from the Republican Party in recent memory. I mean, we're not talking about even Bob Dole here. We're talking about Mitt Romney.
Yeah, this century, he's like the least supported Republican nominee by far.
Yeah.
He was the most milquetoast of Republican candidates by far, yes. But remember what he said in that debate with Barack Hussein Obama, that the greatest geopolitical well, yes, but then the greatest geopolitical threat to the United States was Russia. And do you remember what Barack Hussein Obama said? Governor, the 1980s called and they'd like their foreign policy back. Well, where are we? So, Mitt Romney, yeah, he was milquetoast, but he was right. And if we had listened to Mitt Romney back in 2000, 12 or whenever he was running for president, we might not be in the situation we are right now. But I digress.
All right, yeah, you did digress, and I didn't think we were going there.
That was super weird.
All right. Well, let's hear. These clips will overlap a little bit. Let's move on with this. And again, I was telling my wife today, the personal, the ecclesial, and the political are when those things all collide, and that's what's going on here. It can be ugly, and that's what we have here. So think about the different vectors: political, personal, ecclesial, and this maybe somehow the broader evangelical church issues here, not just PCA, and it's all jumbled up. It's all put in a blender. This is sort of disjointed. I don't know if it was edited, but it's a weird thing. So let's hear clip 2.
He was once a fierce partisan, as he says himself, a Romney delegate in 2012. But for the apostasy of not wanting Donald Trump to be president, he was cast out of a number of Republican institutions, but not only Republican institutions, also from his church in the end. And a few months ago, David wrote a column about being canceled by his church. And so we decided to sit down and talk about what exactly happened and how his readers reacted to the essay.
All right, so I didn't preface this way, but maybe everyone knew. David French is what you would call a never Trumper. He would never vote for Trump, and it turns out he's announced just this week that the best way to save conservatism is to vote for the other candidate. That's riled some people up. He knew that would happen. Can't be a surprise. He says he's going to say in a few minutes that he knew that his stance on Trump would be provocative as well. But what I take issue with here, it's a very biblical metaphor or phrase, way of speaking, cast out, that he was cast out of his church. And is that the PCA? No, the PCA as a denomination doesn't cast out local church members. Did his local church session vote him out because of his support for Trump? Not at all. It says that he was canceled, and it also says that his family was canceled, and I don't know how that happens. So there's some very personal, local, private church issues at work here, but he talks about them. So we're going to talk about them too. Any thoughts on this segment, sirs and lady?
I just want to say that during the second age of Middle Earth, I had argued that the best way to save Beleriand was to fight on the side of Morgoth, and I think that
I don't know what happened to Zach's mic, but
you muted my mic because I was nerding out on Lord of the Rings. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, don't. So, any actual thoughts from other participants?
I can't resist saying that it's not provocative to be against Trump. It's normal. And I don't mean if you like him or dislike him. It's like the most regular thing that you hear, right? People don't like Trump. Isn't he consistently below polling and approval? Again, I'm not commenting on the man, just saying to say that's provocative is a little silly.
Well, I think he's saying he knew it would be controversial in the church because of the, social issues involved. I really don't care who someone votes for, but
that's my point.
If you shout, I don't know, it's saying you're gonna vote for Kamala Harris. Is that like shouting fire in a crowded theater? Not really, but you ought to expect that it's going to rile somebody up.
It's kind of like shouting something else.
There's a reason that we have secret ballots in this country, and it's so that we can get along as a society. We go, we vote, and we accept the outcome. And when we're placarding about who we're voting for, and that's your right as an American, but that comes with consequences. But I think you're on target, Brad, when you point out to say cast out is a particular judicial action. And from what I understand, he and his family left the PCA of their own accord. They weren't cast out. So that is what is it? What is it called when you invent an idea that with no basis in fact? Are we? Is that a conspiracy theory? I don't want. I don't want to get canceled by YouTube.
Well, no, but it's very personal, and he's got strong personal feelings about this, and it's all mixed up in this stuff.
What was helpful for me in his write-up about that is he did say that the pastors were very supportive of him, very supportive of his family, rallied with them, but the pressures felt from fellow pew sitters, we might say, other church members, just prevailed even over the pastor's compassionate care of his family, and they had to leave. And so I guess that casting out was like kind of like mob rule in the church from his perspective. Also, I was corrected from the chat. Morgoth took over Beleriand or fought for it in the first age of Middle Earth.
All right, we won't hear any more of that for a while. So I don't think I read the previous piece, so I haven't heard a whole lot about his experience in the local church with his officers. There was, if church discipline was necessary, I don't think the project was engaged in. We'll hear about what that discipline might have concerned, probably in the next clip. But church discipline doesn't work if you don't use it, and that applies to a member and to the officers. The officers at whatever church he was a member of certainly may have made mistakes. But this is not the way, I don't believe, to work it out. But if you're a national opinion columnist, I guess you take your content where you can get it, and you don't check all your emotions and family concerns and personal feelings at the door. But let's hear some of what may have prompted all this.
David, let me ask you to tell the story in the first place. Could you just tell us a little bit about the church, why you were attracted to it, and then the sequence of events that led to you being canceled?
The story really begins in 2004. I had just uprooted my family from Kentucky, where we were living, and moved to Center City, Philly. And moving from the South to Philadelphia is very different from a church standpoint. And where I came from, there were churches on every street corner. So we looked for churches, found one relatively close to where we lived called 10th Presbyterian. And when we arrived at that church, it fit us like a glove. The people in the church were incredibly kind. And so we fell in love with that church and began to appreciate the denomination it was part of, the Presbyterian Church in America. And then when we moved from Philly back to Tennessee, we immediately went to a PCA church. In fact, we chose our house in part because it was close to a PCA church. And for many years, we had a wonderful experience in that church, just wonderful. But then in hindsight, there were two things that really changed our lives in our church. One was we adopted a little girl from Ethiopia, and there were a number of really gross racial incidents where people at the church or the school would say terrible things to my wife, to my kids. For example, one church member asked my wife, "Why couldn't you adopt from Norway rather than Ethiopia?" A teacher told one of my kids, "What did you do? Did you purchase your sister for a loaf of bread?" And then 5 years after that, again, this is something I did not know would change my life considerably in church. Donald Trump comes down the escalator, begins to capture sort of the evangelical hearts and minds. And I said no to Donald Trump. I ultimately said no to the Republican Party. Didn't say no to being a conservative, but said no to being a Republican. And when we made that decision, we knew there would be blowback. We knew that. We had no idea at all what was really in store for us when we made that decision.
All right, so there's your context. He first went with he states his appreciation and admiration for his local church congregation. He brings in two factors, the Trump stuff, which we'll hear more about, but also that people were insensitive or unkind about his at least one of his children who was adopted. And there's no excuse for that. I don't know what kind of person would do that. That's probably not an occasion for church discipline, just maybe for. Here's one of the things people don't understand. Most church discipline is informal. It's one elder speaking privately with someone, and usually, often, that solves the problem. I don't know that they, complained or brought charges against these people. A session's worst nightmare is someone who takes offense at something and doesn't tell anybody. It festers and they go away. Well, eventually, David French and his family went away. We don't know what discipline processes were or weren't followed. But I spoke to two people today that said, yeah, I had an adopted child who wasn't white, and occasionally people would say things that hurt our feelings, but we dealt with that, and it was all good. Spoke to someone who said they had maybe a child with a cleft palate, and that was uncomfortable and awkward. They were given offense, but they moved on and it worked out. I'm not judging David French's response, his emotional response to these things, but to blame the church may not be the thing to do here. The last I checked, the rate of sinners in the church was 100%. Only my wife almost gets under the bar there, but not even her. So anyone who's involved with the church, Zoe's a pastor's wife. Everyone else is the other three guys are pastors. We know about sin. Sin happens. Offense happens. In every church, there's not any where something like this couldn't have happened, or maybe even wouldn't have happened. So this is both a local issue, but the PCA is being painted with this brush. Any thoughts on this section? Again, let's talk about the children first. That's easy, and then we'll talk a little bit about the political angle.
Well, Brett, I somewhat disagree with you, and I hope not to be booted off like one of our previous panelists. But I do think that if these allegations that Mr. French makes, if these things were actually happening, and I say if because there's no record of them happening, and they should have been reported to the session and the school board, because it sounds like these are happening by the church-operated school, and there should have been discipline, whether that was a formal judicial process or, as you say, just using the powers of the elders acting severally. There should have been some response from either the session or individual elders to these people. And some of the things that he says, I think, would rise to the level of judicial process. But what seems like is he either didn't bring it, he didn't follow, he didn't do his duty as a member of the PCA to study the purity and peace of the church and bring these concerns to the session, or the elders failed to fulfill their vows and preserve and promote the purity and peace of the church by applying discipline to these situations, or these are fabricated. So I think there is a failure of discipline here if these things are true, which we have no evidence that they are. But in a situation like this, speaking generally, members should be able to trust that their elders will discipline, will fulfill their responsibility. But if the elders don't know it's happening, the elders can't take responsibility for it. Right? I lived in Mississippi for 10 years. My office was 100 yards from where Fannie Lou Hamer was beaten to a pulp when I was pastoring for 5 years in Mississippi. And the minute that church, had no patience. It was a small, rural, country Mississippi congregation, and they had no patience for racism. So I think that had the session had opportunity to address this, the outcome may have been quite different. I'm sorry, I'm going too long. But I love the
Yeah.
PCA, and I don't like to hear her slandered.
And I agree with you, but we don't know. One of the reasons to file charges is that there is a record. And in a Presbyterian church, that record will be reviewed by some higher court. Someone could bring a complaint today. That could still be done. But to my knowledge, it has not been done. And I have no idea who, if anyone, is at fault there. So that's why I'm not just going to say absolutely this should have been charges,
Right.
because
It's happened, and we don't have evidence. We have one witness.
All right. Anything else before we play the next clip? Okay, well, to Trump. So that's really what this is about. National. I mean, the reason this is really a big deal is that it's got to do with, the most divisive figure in American politics for as long as anyone can remember. David French is an opinion columnist. I don't know, I think he sometimes appears on Sunday talk shows, but his column comes out every Sunday. He's on TV. He's making his opinion known. And there's a cost that comes with that. So we'll hear a little bit more about that in the next clip. Here we go.
When I first began to write, I was working at that time for a conservative magazine called National Review. When I first began to write against Trump, the threats and harassment and intimidation that came just flooding into us and against our family was overwhelming. And what was deeply discouraging, though, was that when we turned to our church families for support, we didn't find it as uniformly, say, as when I deployed to Iraq in 2007, when my church really, really rallied around me. The bottom line was we got to this point where when we were going to church, we could not be sure that we weren't going to be harassed by somebody. It became a difficult place to go because it didn't feel like home anymore.
All right. So the people in my church don't talk about politics at church. My pastors don't make political pronouncements. They make moral comments and pronouncements based on the Scripture. We pray for the civil magistrate. We pray for the president, often by name, or no doubt who we're talking about. Nearly every Sunday in the pastoral prayers, we're commanded to do that by the Apostle Paul. So that's why we do it. Machen spoke about the problem in his day of politics being brought into the church. Maybe David French never asked for any of this, but by his very presence and opinion, he was bringing politics in with him. But no one should have given him a hard time. No one should have brought it up. And if someone cornered him, we've all been cornered at church by someone who wanted to talk about something that was not appropriate or was not helpful on the Lord's Day. And so we all sympathize with that. There's no doubt that people shouldn't have done that if they did it. So any quick thoughts on politics in the narthex or the hallway or, heaven forbid, even in the worship hall?
I think one of the interesting dynamics here in Mr. French's account of his experience at this church, and I'm being serious, is you have on one hand the church rallying around him and his family when he's deployed to Iraq to serve with military lawyers. And on the other hand, church has become an uncomfortable place, an exceedingly uncomfortable place for him and his family, even almost at the same time, it seems, in his accounting of what transpired. And that seems to encapsulate the experience of many Americans over the last decade, or even more than a decade now, as politics has seemed to consume every aspect of our lives, and it's almost inescapable or unavoidable. But truly, the church should be a safe harbor from partisan politics and political personalities. It should be, if there's one place we can go where we can find a reprieve and focus our attention on heavenly things rather than literally secular things, it should be the church. Not that the Christian faith doesn't have a bearing on our political engagement, but that the church is not to be the arena for political discourse, like so many other places are in our experience.
All right, very good. Any other thoughts before we get more into the PCA angle of this interview? All right, very well. We will hear about a polarizing panel. This is GA General Assembly assembly-wide seminars. And now this one that was proposed, it was for 8 a.m. on Wednesday. There wouldn't have been many people there, I don't think, even if it had gone down. I know a little bit about these. I've been on one a couple of years ago, or maybe it was the year before last. I don't remember. And there aren't a lot of people there. And there were to be 4 participants, and they only last an hour. And by the time of their introductions and wrap up, there are 4 people. It's an equal time thing. David French would only have had 10 minutes to speak, and there wouldn't have been much said. So I think that would have limited the controversial nature of it. But anyway, he does mention that there were to be 3 other people on the stage, which I thought was an interesting way of putting it. I'm not saying that he fancies himself a performer, but he certainly is used to being, the center of attention in events like this. So let's hear this clip.
Okay, so you left the church and found another one in Nashville that you like much better. And nonetheless, you still retained all kinds of ties to people in the church. And that's, of course, how you got invited to the panel that's actually the subject of the column. So maybe just tell us what happened there.
Yeah. So I maintain close friendships, and one of them, who works for the PCA, called and asked if I'd be willing to participate in a panel about helping pastors deal with very polarized times. And they wanted me to share the stage with 3 other people to help people navigate what it's like to be a polarizing figure. And we knew there'd be a backlash. The announcement came, the backlash arrived. I didn't think much about it.
It was pretty ferocious, though.
It was very ferocious. I mean, somebody even wrote a parody song. It was absurd. It was also very malicious and dishonest. But I was fine. I mean, it's sad to say, Aaron, I've been through this many times before, but it was fine. And then I began to hear that the PCA was reacting to this like somebody who's been shocked with a cattle prod. They were reacting with extreme alarm. I learned that they were considering disinviting me. They asked me if I'd voluntarily step away, and I said, nope, I don't give in to trolls. I don't give in to bullies. But about a day or 2 later, the PCA didn't just cancel the panel, Aaron. They put out a statement blaming me. And the statement was referring to, a PCA official was, had I known about some of David's prior writings or the way people had received them, when, wait a minute, had he known, it's not like I'd put these words in some sort of private listserv.
Yes. Had we known about the thoughts published in numerous periodicals all over the United States by this man. Yes.
All right. Well, that's an interesting section, and it raises all sorts of questions. And I think maybe you get what I was talking about when we talked about the church and the PCA. He left his local church, thus he left the PCA. The PCA invited him. Well, no, there's some controversy about how he was invited. Someone delegated, an employee of the PCA, maybe a small committee, came up with this. The PCA in the general. Let's talk about the PCA as the General Assembly. Thousands of men who come together to vote and do business. No one ever voted. No large body ever voted to invite David French. They just didn't. We don't. The PCA didn't choose David French. 1 or 2 or a few people did. And in as much as they had the right, delegated, to invite him, they also had the right to disinvite him, and not to mention the other 3 who were disinvited. So we might actually have to play this clip a second time. There's so much in it. but I'd love to hear. Ryan, tell us about your understanding. And again, he's talking about a PCF. He talks about having a friend in the PCA, but then he talks about the person who actually invited him as just an official who should have known better, who should have known who he was. And that refers, I think, to our stated clerk. And I'm not sure that the stated clerk has gotten a fair deal in all this. But Ryan, I think you probably have the best handle on the particulars.
Well, yeah, and before I go into that, that criticism that Mr. French offers, I think is fair. Had he known, I think that, yeah, there should have been some homework done before this invitation was issued, and I think that is a reasonable response.
I think there are people who are not obsessed with politics, and people who have a very narrow focus, and I don't doubt the fact that that our stated clerk didn't know that much about the controversy. I think he's telling the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, I contacted him early. I don't know if I was the first. I could have been, and I said this is going to be very controversial, and I think he was somewhat surprised by that. And not everyone follows David French or politics or the New York Times or everything on Twitter or Fox News or NBC all the time. And we forget that, but that's true.
Yeah, but in his June 9th article, Mr. French says that in March of 2024, a friend reached out and asked if he would be willing to serve on a panel addressing the General Assembly. And then on April 16th, 2024, Nancy French states in an article that her family recently left the PCA for Strong Tower Bible Church. And then May 9th, the PCA magazine announces David French has been invited by the administrative committee to address the General Assembly as part of the plenary seminar with 3 actual elders from the PCA. And so then on May 10th, in response to an overwhelming number of comments from the denomination, the stated clerk sends a list of clarifying questions to Mr. French regarding his views. May 13th, Tennessee Valley Presbytery sends a letter to the stated clerk urging him to replace Mr. French with a PCA elder, as they note with sadness the polarization that resulted from the stated clerk's choice. And then on May 14th, 2024, my wedding anniversary, the administrative committee of the Presbyterian Church in America met and votes to replace the plenary seminar with a prayer meeting. And the stated clerk chapel takes responsibility for Mr. French's invitation. And he said he just didn't know there was this public controversy. And, that happens sometimes. But he owned his mistake, and that's to be commended.
And I don't say it was, I don't expect everyone to be prescient about every controversy, and especially in 2024 with all that's going on. But I think we should have been cautious because it is 2024. It was, and it is, and it will be for a few more blessed months. So I'm sure some of you other guys or lady have thoughts on what we've just heard about this debacle, really.
This is an epic story if you think about it. There's a real cast of characters here. I mean, you have a friend, an official, a nefarious singer-songwriter, a New York Times columnist. I mean, think about just how epic this saga has become.
Yeah, you can stop there. We got it.
I don't like the fact that he sets it up that, we're told from the beginning that it was the fundamentalist wing. And yet it doesn't take a lot of knowledge of the landscape of the PCA to know that there were people that were unhappy with this decision that weren't on the wing that he describes, or even of the way he would describe it. This was across the board a bad idea, maybe for a variety of reasons, some good, maybe some bad. The point is that people didn't really want this, and they didn't want him there for a variety of reasons, I think. And I think that he has set this up very badly to cast Tennessee Valley Presbytery as a fundamentalist wing of the PCA. That's just not the case.
Yeah. Well, he certainly, well, it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm old. I lost my train of thought there. But he does not support the fundamental. He doesn't define fundamentalism. Fundamentalist is a slur. It's almost, I called it the F word. He doesn't define it, and he doesn't really flesh out why he thinks we're fundamentalist. It seems to be that because we were against all this, we're fundamentalist. And
right. It's that we didn't want him, or so the people that didn't want him it's almost as if we are to assume that they were, based on what he said so far, somewhat in line with people who mocked his adopted child or are strong Trump voters who did not want anyone to speak negatively about Trump or Trump voters or whatever. And so that's how he's talked so far. So if you don't know, you're probably assuming that that's the type person that he's speaking of. And that's just not the case. We all know people that did not want him there that probably disagree with us politically one way or the other. I think it's very unfair what he's saying.
Well, Joe, I think you raise an important point. There is no fundamentalist wing in the PCA. There
Correct.
are very few fundamentalists in the PCA. There are a few, right, folks who don't drink, don't smoke, that's what fundamentalism is. But Reformed theology, the Reformed Church, is actually incompatible with fundamentalism. And so it's just ignorant of theology, of history, of the denomination he claims to have been a part of and loved for so long, to say that there are fundamentalists here.
I think he's speaking particularly of cultural, political fundamentalists. He's probably got something from the 80s and 90s in the back of his mind. He's I think in some sense, I wonder if he might say the people that reacted the way they did to Bill Clinton should have reacted this way to Donald Trump, and yet they didn't. And so they chose the right or the Republican Party or something of that nature. And I think that bothers him. Maybe there's something to that. I don't think this is the place to flesh that out. But I think when he says fundamentalists, he's thinking very political, cultural, God and country type things, as opposed to alcohol and tobacco.
Which is very interesting, because from what I understand, the stated clerk received upwards of 300 emails complaining about the invitation and 30 emails supporting it. And so if there is a fundamentalist party in the PCA, it is 10 times the size of, let's call it, the after party on the other side. And I mean, that's remarkable. I think that in reality, you have a strong contingent of presbyters who don't want a politically polarizing figure in the PCA. I think we would have had 300 emails complaining about, take your pick of somebody from the right wing. Tucker
Rush
Carlson,
Limbaugh,
Rush Limbaugh's passed away, but Tucker Carlson or Bill O'Reilly. Yeah, okay. Or, does
Matt
David
Walsh.
French? Does David French think that if we invited Matt Walsh or Donald Trump to speak on a panel, that the PCA would say, "Oh, this is great, let's bring them"? No, I think there would be the same amount of blowback, as he put it, because we don't want to have that kind of political polarization on either side in a church. It's not where it belongs. We're supposed to, again, be a safe haven from these sorts of things.
Zach, I think your point of 300 is telling, not simply for the numbers, but our stated clerk, if he read these 300 emails, and that tells you that of those 300, they were probably almost assuredly not from one sect, one wing, one group, whatever. There were enough of them across the board that he felt, and that, or they, the people that read them, said, okay, this is something we've got to take seriously. We've got 300 emails. If it were 300 of one obvious contingency, I'm not saying they wouldn't have canceled it, but he set it up to where that's what it was, or that is the way it was. And I'm thinking, no, that we've all been the PCA long enough to know that 300 is probably wider than what he thinks it is. or what we are led to believe the kind of person wrote those.
All right, let's hear him talk about the aftermath of the Disinvitation.
Well, are we going to hear the song that he talks about?
We might at the end, but
Okay,
it will
I'm just
depend on
wondering.
how you behave between now and then.
I don't know why it has anything to do with me.
Go
Can
ahead.
I say one more thing before you move on? He notes that he would share the stage with 3 other people to help people navigate what it's like to be a polarizing figure. So if
he accurately represented it the first time. It was to help pastors know how to deal with people because of the political stress. But then he re-described it, and if that had been the only way he would have described it, I would have made a big deal about that. But I think David French thought it was about him. I really do.
Oh, but the way you tell a pastor is don't be polarizing if you're a pastor. Don't be polarizing if you're an elder.
That's not what Mr. French was going to tell them.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right. So David French is a celebrity of sorts, and we generally don't do well with celebrities. Let's hear what they say about the Disinvitation.
Yes. So they canceled the panel. You wrote the column, and we got an absolute outpouring of response. You talked a little bit before about being inured to the attacks, but when you got all these letters and emails directly, you were very moved by them.
Yes. Yeah. So, as I came home from church on Sunday after the column posted, and I do what I normally did. I went to my computer and I opened up my inbox to see what kind of response I'm getting. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. And it absolutely blew me away. And then I opened the first email and I thought, wow, this is different. And then the next one, and then the next one. And then it actually began to be a sacred obligation to my readers to read these, that if they're going to honor me with their stories, if they're going to honor me by telling maybe stories, and some of them said, I've never said this before, then I wanted to read, I wanted to understand them. And then to as many people as I could, I at least wanted to indicate that I read it, I see them, I read their story. It's the most remarkable thing I've ever seen.
I want to talk a little bit about our readers' responses in different categories and kind of get your reaction to that. I'm actually going to play 3 recordings for you to listen to. The first is from Sue-Ann.
My story parallels that of David French. My parents were founding members of a Presbyterian PCA congregation. My best friends growing up were the children of the other founding members. We attended church activities together and were part of each other's families. When I attended Wheaton College rather than our denominational school, it was considered somewhat suspicious. I married in that church, and one of these friends, now an elder, said that some elements in my wedding ceremony were practically heretical, but they let it go because my parents were members. I have lived away now for 30 years, but it is a constant ache in my heart that I can no longer share myself freely with these friends to whom I was so connected. Like Mr. French, I adopted an international child. I took her back on a visit, hoping she could be baptized in the church her grandparents helped found. The church elders cited bylaws as a reason for not allowing a baptism, but didn't offer a dedication or even a prayer. As this split widens in America, I wish to understand how our actions and shared understandings have strayed so far from the Beatitudes that we can freely use rejection and hateful words against each other and then blithely quote the Gospel, saying, "Love one another."
How do you react to what happened to her?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is that email is, and that message is not atypical. What you're seeing is throughout American Christianity now is the fundamentalist wing is really exerting itself.
Okay, so back to the fundamentalist issue, but nothing that we heard that lady say, and I'm sure she's a nice lady. I have a suspicion that they have actors reading these things. I think that's a professional recording. I'm not sure we're actually hearing the lady who typed an email. But nothing that she says involves fundamentalism. We
Well,
hear this.
Wheaton was a fundamentalist institution.
Yeah, but it's not what David French is talking about. We hear the story of someone who, some elders said that her wedding ceremony was not up to their standards. We have standards. You get married in my church, you've got to use music out of one of our hymnals. And if you're going to play something else, we have to approve it. We're not going to have anything said or done in our church, even on a Saturday at a wedding. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with having standards. And it sounded like they let her do it anyway. She wanted to have her non-resident grandchild baptized in a church where she was not a member, nor were the child's parents. I'm sorry, but that's PCA doctrine. That cannot and ought not be done. There's nothing hateful, and we don't do baby dedications, and generally we don't have, between the call to worship and the benediction, there's no element of worship called praying for babies that you don't want to baptize, or blessing them. She's asking for things that have nothing to do with PCA process and order. But how you get from that to fundamentalism, and David French knows better. I know he knows better. What she described has nothing to do with fundamentalism. So I don't want to get too cranked up. Let's hear the thoughts of the rest of you.
I agree, and those were my thoughts. That she's just not Presbyterian. That if you want to have a child who is not a member of a congregation baptized, then you need to go do that somewhere else, because that's not how Presbyterians view baptism. That it is a covenant sign for the covenant community. It's not for someone because the grandparents were founding members. That's just a social affair. She doesn't understand what baptism is. And then, as far as not going to the PCA college, the vast majority of PCA people don't go to Covenant College. They go to Furman or they go to Clemson. They don't go to Covenant, and it's just odd that she felt ostracized because of that. Maybe she was, on the mountain or something. I don't know.
No, there are a number of very odd things in there, and this is there's three of these readers who commented who they either had someone read their emails or they got with them and recorded them saying what was said in their emails, which seems very oddly edited and very writerly in some cases. I don't want to say I don't believe this happened or that these aren't real, but there's something a little off about this. This is the only negative example of fundamentalism that is cited, and this is not fundamentalism. If having a book of church order and doctrine about sacraments is fundamentalist, there are fundamentalists all over. All of the EPC, every day park denomination. If everyone's fundamentalist, no one's fundamentalist. If everyone's fundamentalist, or if this is fundamentalist, it doesn't mean anything. As a writer, words ought to probably mean something.
Brad,
Do you think that? Go ahead.
Sorry, Ryan. Brad, we grew up in similar areas, similar contexts of church. I think that if someone wanted their baby prayed for in an actual fundamentalist setting in the church service, they would have done it. And so that's like one immediate thing. I'm like, well, this is the opposite, actually. The order and the obedience, or whatever you want to call it, to guidelines, that's the opposite of fundamentalism.
That's a good point.
That's the exact opposite of what goes on in those settings. And so again, we've got fundamentalism shaped up as anyone restricting you from anything you want to do. Is that what this means?
Yeah, you got it. You hit the nail on the head. And what you have here, well, let me back up. In my church, I love it when people take ownership of the church and really own things in the church and take care of things and step up and lead through service and all of that. But there's also an unhealthy kind of ownership of the church, a filialatry, where the church belongs to my family. My family's been here forever. I should be able to do whatever I want to do with my family in the church because this is my family's church. You know what I'm talking about? And that's actually a far more fundamentalistic impulse than having a book of church order that very clearly lays out this is how things go here, and this is how we treat people equitably, regardless of their filial connections or history in the church.
Certainly, that kind of attitude can happen in a PCA church and does.
Yeah.
But this provision or prevention is designed to stop that.
Yep.
Therefore, it's not fundamentalist.
Now, this, again, aside from the things that David French says happened to him and the reactions to things he said and did, this is the evidence that the PCA is dominated by fundamentalists. I think we've proven it's no such thing. And he'll go right back to the deeply intolerant strain of fundamentalism that views any disagreement with them as apostasy. I don't know anyone who believes that in the PCA. I just don't. And I know some wackos. Some of them could be on the gall, but it's just not accurate. It's not fair, and it's not true. This is not a true description. To use this little snippet from a lady who hasn't been in a PCA church for 30 years as evidence that the PCA is dominated by an intolerant, hateful fundamentalism is about the most ridiculous thing I've seen in a while. But I think we should move on because I'm stuck on this. So let's move ahead.
Throughout American Christianity now is the fundamentalist wing is really exerting itself. And so what that means is when you encounter somebody who's a fundamentalist and you say, I'm not voting for Trump, they often don't look at that as a debatable point for which Christians in goodwill can disagree. They will look at this and say, it is the natural and inevitable consequence of applying Christian principles that you will support Donald Trump. And so what's happening is that these individuals who are being rejected from churches and telling stories like that, what they're encountering is this deeply intolerant strain of fundamentalism that views any disagreement with them as apostasy. And so what that does is it raises the stakes to this eternal level. And what ends up happening is they just sweep aside all of these scriptures about loving your enemies, being kind to those, blessing those who persecute you. All of that is just swept aside in favor of the burning certainty and ferocity of the culture war.
All right. Well, that's kind of more of the same. It didn't get better. I think David French tells us here that what he's really concerned about is Donald Trump. And
Surprise.
I don't think that's what everyone in our churches are. I don't think that's not typical. He says this is typical of something. It might be typical of something he heard about on MSNBC, but I don't think it's typical of anything you're going to find in 90%, 95% of PCA churches. I just think it's a gross caricature. It's actually bigotry. It's actually slander in some cases. I'm not saying he slandered any individual, but it has the effect of slander and misinformation. So I'll shut up. And
Brad, I don't want our viewers to miss how postmodernist this is. Number one, Mr. French has taken a word that used to have a fixed meaning, a technical meaning, and he's imported his own definition to that. He's not using it with any historical, philosophical, religious context. He's just making up a definition. And then second, notice how they're using these stories, that my experience is my truth, that this woman had a bad experience in the PCA when she wanted the PCA to do something for her that was actually contrary to our theology and our polity and our sacramentology in particular. And suddenly the PCA is bad. Why? Because they disagreed with her. And so notice how then the hermeneutic for everything is now love. And I found this unloving, but they can't define love. Love is you do exactly what I want you to do. You support me in my vocal opposition of Donald Trump. You support me in my wanting to bring my child for baptism at a church where his grandparents were members, but I'm not and he's not. Well, we don't do that. So who's the real fundamentalist here?
The irony, I think, Ryan, in what you're saying is that, well, it's not irony, but David French picks a story of a woman whose indignation at being given something by a PCA church is exactly the same as David French's indignation at not having been given something by the PCA. And I think that it is really at its core about Trump. It's kind of interesting to me how David French is a controversial figure because he's conservative. What he did, this conservative is how he describes himself, but a lot of people would not consider his views conservative. So um, he's conservative, but he doesn't vote for Trump. He claims that people use voting for Trump as a method to evaluate somebody's virtue, but that's exactly what he does, just in the opposite direction. And so, what you'll actually see, I think he has been influenced by the New York Times much more than he has influenced the New York Times by being a columnist, because this game that they play with definitions, including when it pertains to the voting block, which is really what every virtuous or moral issue is about, this game that they play is very common. Trump voters are backwoods, Trump voters are this, Trump voters are that. And instead of dealing with an issue on singularity, it's really about Trump deep down. And so I just can't, it's very difficult for me to take this argument that a bunch of people in the PCA really mean seriously, because I think ultimately it's being filmed through this lens of opposition about politics. And so that's kind of what this is making me think about. I don't know.
You hit the nail on the head with the word irony. I mean, it's supremely ironic that one who seems to evaluate very publicly and very frequently people's moral standing on the basis of whether or not they embrace a particular political candidate turns around and castigates people for doing precisely the same thing in the opposite direction. I will say from my experience, I grew up in Philadelphia, and I'm from the North, where, in my milieu, I was a judge of elections one year in a precinct of 600 people. 98% of them were registered Democrats. And so that was my milieu growing up. Now I live in the South. It's kind of flipped. And up north, if you let it be known that you weren't voting for the Democratic candidate, you would be socially ostracized and harassed. Down here in the South, if people know that you're not voting for the Republican candidate, it's not really a big deal, at least not from what I can tell in my experience. And so, if we're talking about stories, well, I can troop out anecdotes that directly counter everything that Mr. French and his fan base have been bringing to the fore.
Yeah, and we shouldn't castigate our fellow church members for things like this. Now, if we think they actively think abortion is a good thing, we're probably going to counsel them on that, because there's something they don't understand about the law of God. But I had a PCA pastor, a former PCA pastor, who actually once he was speaking, and he said, there might be times when you have to vote a certain way that doesn't look like the best way, but you may judge it to be good. We have to extend some charity. There might be, we can't be single issue voters. There's all sorts of, it seems more simple and cut and dried now than it used to be, but we shouldn't castigate each other or persecute each other, certainly, over these things. But it's just not that simple. But we ought to be nice to each other. We really ought to. We shouldn't make racist remarks to people about their children. Absolutely not. Never. There could be church. You could be disciplined for being too political in a church. That would be appropriate. That could happen. So you're not going to get disciplined for not voting, though, and you're not going to be disciplined for not supporting this or that. But you can actively support things in a very obnoxious and inappropriate way.
And what this would look like is if somebody comes into the church, they begin propagating their views, proselytizing or evangelizing for something less than the gospel, i.e. a political position or candidate, and the elders come alongside that person and very tenderly and gently say, hey, that's not appropriate here. That's not what we want to see here. That's not what the church is for. And the person persists. and thus disturbs the peace of the church. And then at that point, it proceeds to discipline. So it's not like someone's going to get walloped upside the head out of the blue. I mean, it's going to be a very personal kind of, approaching the situation. But you're absolutely right, Brad. It would be appropriate to bring that to bear in the kinds of situations that are being described in this interview.
All right, let's move on. Here's some more of this. I may pause this in the middle, or I may let it play. We'll see. But let's roll on with this. This will be 2 more clips after this one.
So obviously not all the responses were personal stories, right? People talked a lot about their own frustration with polarization. They talked a lot about what's happening in society as a whole, but they also wanted to push back against you a little bit. We're going to give 2 examples of pushback now, one from Sherry Irvine and another from a man named Claude.
My question to you, Mr. French, is why do Republicans only see bad behavior when it happens to them? I have witnessed white churches discriminate against people of color, LGBT folks, and women ever since I became an adult. Did you not notice these unchristian traits in your church until they affected you?
The only thing that surprises me about the story is how willfully blind French seems to have been to the racism, homophobia, and cult-like behavior of his church and political party, which should have at least prepared him for their rejection of him. It seems that only when those racists and homophobes targeted him did he come to a realization of what his co-religionists have been up to for a very long time.
All right, let me try to break in here. He's being criticized by real liberals who have a beef with all of Christianity, and he's going to have a hard time talking his way out of this. These are intersectional concerns where racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and support for the wrong political candidate all get mixed up and blended together. He's going to have a hard time walking out of this. He's going to try to defend good Christians, but it's going to be difficult. So let's continue.
Yeah, those are really good questions. So let me answer it, and there's a number of aspects to the answer. So one of them is just mea culpa. There's a lot of this stuff I should have seen. And so to my shame, a lot of this I just didn't see. And some of it I saw, but wrongly categorized it as extremely exceptionally bad behavior, as opposed to as common as I've come to understand that it is. So first, full stop, mea culpa, there are things I did not see that I should have seen.
All right. This is sort of him giving in to the struggle session, if you will, if you want to use a Maoist image. He seems to halfway agree with the liberal critics that the church is homophobic and has all these other problems. He's in a difficult spot here.
Now, the second thing is the church culture writ large has gone to great lengths to bury, to cover up, to conceal misconduct and scandal within the church. So it becomes literally difficult to see it because a lot of it is covered up by non-disclosure agreements. A lot of it is covered up by confidential closed-door church proceedings. And that kind of tries to preserve amongst people in the church the sense that we're good people, our community is good. But the last thing I would say is when you're talking about the conflicts over American religion and spirituality, it is not persuasive to me to say, well, you uphold various traditional Christian teachings, therefore you're part of the problem. When people are attacking the church by attacking the actual sort of fundamental biblical elements of evangelical Christianity, that is not persuasive to people because it's essentially saying your religion is false. But if you go in and you say, wait a minute, under your own faith, you're supposed to, as I said, act justly, love kindness, and walk humbly, that is a much more compelling critique.
All right. So, it's funny. I've got this series on a Machen address now about Machen talks about the church should be ethical. but not in a merely socially acceptable, functional, improved society way. So this issue of he's talking about ethics here, and he's talking about nice Christians and mean Christians, more or less. So any thoughts on this little patch?
I mean, I really want to know if David French is signing up for the larger catechism's teaching on the seventh commandment. I want to know if David French is signing up for the creeds and confessions that he just referenced as okay with him, because it doesn't sound to me like he is. He's punting into an emotional appeal, I would say, to these people were mean to me and they're mean to other people that you shouldn't be mean to.
Well, and speaking of that, he interjects sexual abuse and sex scandals into this to blame that largely on fundamentalists when we know that every type of church has these problems. So I thought that was a little, quite a juke to bring in sex abuse and sex scandals and just, the way you bring things in, what you put next, what contentions and truths you put next to other things, it's very subtle, the effect it can have. But I think that's not what we were talking about, but then all of a sudden, that's what we're talking about. All
and
right,
it goes without saying that those kinds of situations are true, real abuses that have no place in the church, and it's a sadness when that kind of hypocrisy breaks out. But the PCA actually, in my opinion, deals with it pretty well, and the things don't get buried under a mountain of bureaucratic shuffling of the cards to keep them out of sight. I mean, we bring this stuff to light, and there's really no tolerance of it once it comes to light.
Yeah, I think his words here are playing to people that are already disposed against the church. And I think if you're a Christian, you want to be honest, but you actually want to say the church is where it's at, and that's where you need to be. And we have to address the reality of sin, but we can't just act like we're nice and we're nicer than these other people, and you should come be nice with us. That's early 20th century Protestant liberalism. Sorry. All right. Well, we've just got one more, so we'll go ahead and play it. And I don't think it's very long. Sort of a wrap up, and then we'll have time to talk a little bit at the end, and we'll finish at about our normal time. So here we go.
One of the reasons why this was painful to me is in many ways, I am theologically still at home in large parts of the PCA. And so to say, well, that it's just rotten, because of its confessions and creeds, et cetera. No, that is not the case. What we're talking about here, or what I'm talking about, is the malice, the cruelty, the hypocrisy. Every Christian should understand the need to respond to that.
Yeah, and I think most do. I think we do understand that. You're going to hear a little. It's going to be a little odd. The interviewer is going to say to David French, "You've changed a whole lot," and he's going to have to say, "Well, no, I haven't changed that much. But if I have changed, it's because of the other people, the other Christians, and Donald Trump."
So you've changed a lot, more honestly than most people change in their lives. And part of the ardor against you is coming from, in part, right, that you did share the confessions and the creeds. You were in the trenches on the other side. Is that part of what you think is driving the animus? What have you learned being two different types of people?
Yeah, there are definitely ways in which I've changed, but there are also definitely ways in which the community I was a part of changed. And so these two things were happening at the same time. And for me, many of the changes in my community triggered changes in me. And so let's just take, for example, I spent my career as a free speech attorney. And if you look at my record, I worked both for secular and religious organizations, but at every turn, I defended people regardless of whether they agreed with me or not. And for a while, that was a priority in the Republican Party. That was at least a professed priority. Along comes the age of Trump, and the party takes this very authoritarian turn, which contradicted all of my previous legal work, quite frankly. But at the same time, that move, that GOP move, vindicated a lot of critiques of the GOP that I had previously dismissed. And it made me realize that I had not been seeing my own community as clearly as I needed to. I mean, my blinders were so big, Aaron, that when Trump came down the escalator, I just dismissed him. I thought, there's just no way. There's no way my community will embrace this guy. And then it was my community that put that guy in the Oval Office. And so it made me need to see things more clearly.
I think we'll end there. David, I know it's painful to talk about all of this, so thank you very much for taking the time.
Well, thanks so much, Aaron. This was a great conversation.
Well, it was a conversation. I think he told us in the end that this is all about his political views. And again, I think we can't say it too many times. Don't make anything in your life all about your political views. It's not the most important thing in your life. It's certainly not the most important thing in your Christian life. It's almost like we've taken the all of life doctrine to its extreme. What happens at the church on the Lord's Day is the most important part of your week. Now, you shouldn't do anything to ruin the Lord's Day for other people by saying mean things, racist things, hateful things, or terribly political things. But I don't know. I just want to say, don't be like hardly anybody in these stories that we've heard tonight. So, thoughts on this as we've heard the whole 16 minutes. What do you say?
I feel like he would say church and not be specific. And then by the end, he talked about the GOP and his community. And again, he seems to be angry about something political that he referenced earlier, talking about eternal and spiritual things. And then he brings it back to free speech in his community and ties it all into one. And it's very odd. I think that this is just a very confused frustration over really it is just it's politics and the particular ways and views of a certain politician and expectation from him that Christians would side with him and see what he felt was obvious. And that's just not how it works in politics. It's not simple cut and dry, easy to decide on everything. There are a lot of reasons, and Christians, I think, probably have the hardest time making political decisions because there are so many things that we would desire and aspire to, but then we can often disagree on what would be the most Christian, ethical, virtuous way to do something. And it seems that he has a certain understanding of that is also, he's equating as Christian and also taking something that is political, equating it as a Christian belief and social practice, but then is getting angry when others do that, when in reality, we don't have a defined political position on certain things. There's no defined Christian political position on free speech per se. I mean, it's often accepted as such, but it's not like what about it is, what are the boundaries of that are not clear. They're not defined in a religious sense. And I think there's just a lot of mixing up of these things in a personal hurt. And I'm not going to invalidate any or one part, but there's personal hurts there that are bleeding over here that I just think they're unnecessary and uncharitable to a lot of people.
Yeah. Ryan?
Well, I wonder, if, as Mr. French says, he's still theologically at home in the PCA. then those last two clips that you played from folks alleging discrimination against women and sodomites by the church, how does he interpret that? As Zach asked, does he agree with Westminster on the seventh commandment? I don't know. As somebody said in the chat, it seems as though the New York Times has influenced him more than he's influenced the New York Times. And since he doesn't really have a church home now, he's being influenced by the world. And that's a problem. And it comes out in this article that politics is what is driving him. And the blessing of being a Christian, and this is what so much of the letter of Paul to the Philippians is about, is that your citizenship is not primarily here. But for Mr. French, it seems like politics is all he is thinking about, whether it was injecting yourself with experimental drugs, all sorts of things, whether it's Drag Queen Story Hour, all he seems to think about in his Lord's Day column is politics. And notice, what did he say? The first thing he did when he got home from worship on the Lord's Day is check his email to see what hate mail or fan mail he's getting. Way to make the Lord's Day about you. And of course, this is the guy who wrote
we don't want to get too personally judgy here of David French. We don't know what it's like to be a New York Times columnist. I agree with you.
That is true. I don't know what that's like.
You should know, though. You'd be great. You'd be great for the New York Times, Ryan. I would vote for that.
That's the meanest thing you've ever said to me, Mr. Groff.
You would bring balance immediately just by showing up. But
is that a weight comment? Are you calling me fat?
No.
Only your politics.
All right. So what I wanted to actually get on was something sympathetic to Mr. French. Believe it or not, he's not alone. Again, I think I said it a little bit earlier, or somebody said it earlier in the episode. Politics has consumed us to a fever pitch, and not just an election year. It's every year. And certainly Mr. Trump's larger-than-life personality and the deranged responses to him, either in favor of him or in opposition to him, have fueled that. But the political culture has gone crazy in the last 10 years, and a lot of people are consumed by it, and a lot of people have very legitimate concerns. And we as pastors or elders, Zoe excluded in this, but she's the wife of a pastor, we have a responsibility and an obligation to think Christianly about politics and about how to shepherd the souls of people who are unhealthily consumed by it. And I think, Brad, your advice of just reminding folks this is not the most important thing in your life is something we need to keep in front of people in all of our interactions with them, and make scriptural appeals for folks to set their affections heavenward. And only by doing so will they be of any earthly good. And I think maybe Mr. French needs to have that reminder, and to think more deeply about political obligations in a Christian frame and how they fit into the larger matrix of the Christian life in a fallen world as we make our pilgrimage through it.
Well, you started with Lord of the Rings and you went to the Matrix, so that's just absolutely perfect.
And ended with Pilgrim's Progress.
Well, and again, I didn't want to play Zach's silly song. I didn't promote it when it first came out. Let's just set it. We're going to play it because we've alluded to it. There was a big couple of years ago, big hit, a surprise hit song called "Rich Men North of Richmond," and it was sort of a populist anthem. A guy named Anthony Oliver, or Oliver Anthony, I never remember.
Got a big red beard.
Yeah, most of you have heard about it. Well, on a text thread one day, I said something to Zach. I said, well, we need a story called, well, I think I did. Okay, I'll admit it. I think I said French Men North of Richmond.
Yeah, it was all you, Brad.
Because of this controversy. We were just talking. Well, so he very inadvisedly went on and did this thing. And as you hear it, remember, it's a Yankee trying to sound like a Southerner. So it's a little awkward. But I think we're just going to hear this. Zach's song.
But note.
Go ahead.
David French is not the only one who gets called out in this song.
Right.
Russell Moore does as well, and Donald Trump.
Yeah. So again, it is a more balanced song, and it was just fun. I mean, it was so ridiculous that I didn't really think anybody would take it that seriously.
It got under somebody's skin.
It did. It was mentioned twice in the New York Times. So let's see if this will fly.
I've been living my life, walking the way, working all week, worship on the Lord's day, so I can go to church to praise our God and pray, and get back home and rest my troubles away. It's a real shame what the world's gotten to for Presbys like me, Presbys like you. Wish I could sing the Psalms and speak all the truth, but here it is, living in the new school with an old soul. That Frenchman up in Richmond, we all know they just want to browbeat us into a pope. Want to mock what you think, want to hate what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do, cause this blogging's no good, and it's tired, my friend. Oh, that Frenchman up in Richmond. Wish all our meetings would be for presbyters and not just spectators in a hall somewhere. Oh, we got pastors under heat, ain't got no relief, and ruling elders pulling their hair. Brothers, if we're gonna be faithful and true, we all not to heed French, more Trump too. Our men are putting themselves out into the grind, cause obedience ain't but rarely appealing or fine. Oh, it's a real shame what the world's gotten to for Presbys like me, Presbys like you. Wish I could sing the Psalms and speak all the truth, but here it is, living in the new school with an old soul. That Frenchman up in Richmond, we all know they just want to browbeat us into a pope. Want to mock what you think, want to hate what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do, cause this blogging's no good, and it's tired, my friend. Oh, that Frenchman up in Richmond.
Well, with apologies to David French. Sorry, it's not over.
Walking the way,
Wishful thinking.
working all week, worship on the Lord's day.
Again, with apologies to David French, Anthony Oliver, or Oliver Anthony, whatever his name is, all you who have listened, and even to our friend Zach for promoting him in this manner. And I guess I did come up with the idea. But again, be careful what you suggest, because it just might happen. And we miss Resby tonight. He suggested Presbycast, and it happened. He's working. But that's just a cautionary tale to all of our friends.
Hey, Brad.
Yes.
In light of what David French said in the interview we kind of picked apart today, are you going to rename Presbycast Fundycast?
I don't think that I will.
I mean,
David French is not the first person to suggest that Presbycast is just a bunch of fundies. He's like 2 years too late, so he needs to go with the times.
And I didn't. Here's what I forgot to say earlier when I had the brain freeze. Those who have recently called the PCA fundamentalist were the Side B Revoice crowd and their supporters. And he may not know that, but we know it. So it hits a little different in that context. All right. Well, Zach, I'm not going to ask you to defend your work. People know how to reach you. And Calvary Presbytery, they can find the clerk and send the complaints to him. And he's watching tonight, so he won't
Brad,
be surprised. Go ahead.
Just a point of order. A complaint is BCO 43. Report is BCO 31-2.
Oh, come on, guys. There's
right.
so many of those going around the PCA right now. Do we really need another one? I mean,
Here's
come on.
a direct link for you to Facebook Messenger the stated clerk and register your complaint
He
or your
doesn't-
report, as the case may be.
I give him enough headaches as it is. Please don't.
My
bother
understanding
him.
is he's in the live chat, so I think it could just be submitted.
Just put the letter in the live chat.
Well, you hear the music, and that knows that that lets you know that you're not going to get to talk much more. Again, we do miss Resby not being here. He'll be back. We'll have
He is
another.
fondly remembered.
That's right. We'll have
May
another
he
show.
rest in peace.
We'll have another show this week. This was an emergency show. I hope we didn't offend too much, but we hope everyone will get along and love one another. Because we are all, in fact, saints, and one day we're all going to go marching in.
We are all fundamentalists.
What's wrong with you people?